Hello everyone, and welcome back. I haven't made a video for a while. I've been busy with other things. Life is going well, but one of the things about being on YouTube is that if you don't do it for a while, even if it is just 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I don't remember how long it's been, but I have lost my rhythm. It's a bit harder to get back if you have a bit of an unscheduled silence. And I've picked the wrong book to do this video with because the book is itself also hard to talk about. But I insist on doing it. I insist on making this video. The book is Grimmish, written by Michael Winkler. This book was published last year in Australia, but it was published this year, 2023, by Coach House Books, Canadian publisher. And I think this is the first book by Coach House Books that I've read. The design of the book is beautiful. I love the book as a product, as an artifact. I love the way the pages are laid out. I love the quality of the paper. I love everything about the design of this book, and I'm going to check out more books by Coach House Publishing. Anyways, what is Grimmish about? Grimmish is a novel centered around the character of Joe Grimm. Joe Grimm. The legal name of Joe Grimm was Saverio Giannone, the Italian origin of that character. He was a boxer who rarely won a match, but he became well known for his ability to withstand extraordinary amount of physical punishment. So he could just get beaten up by his opponents and not get knocked out. And that became that kind of passive status became so extraordinary, so intense, that it turned into an active role. It turned into his self-expression. He did this subtle transformation of the game of boxing, which is about who wins against the other one. He introduced a game within that game. That game was a challenge to his opponents. Knock me out if you can. Defeat me before the end of the official end of the last round, if you can. And people couldn't do that. So overtly he would lose, but covertly he would win in his own game. Why is this book difficult to read? It's not because of the descriptions of pain, the combat sport. No. The reason why this book is difficult is because of Winkler's use of language. He's giving priority here to raw material of this description, raw material of life and situations, not neat storytelling. So we have, on the one hand, let's imagine that opposition for a moment. On the one hand, we have the tendency to construct neat stories, neat storytelling, and reading that feels like going through a very smooth road, journey along a very smooth road, well-constructed road. On the other hand, you have not so much construction of a neat story, but the material out of which stories are constructed, the raw material, the raw building blocks. And if you give more attention to those, if you want people to pay attention, to be attentive, to notice the material, you have to sacrifice the neat storytelling. So for that reason, the book is tough to read, because it doesn't feel like going through a smooth journey along a well-constructed road. It feels like hitting against a series of obstacles, similar to how Joe Grimm's opponents, for them, Joe Grimm was an obstacle. This book presents itself as an obstacle for a reader who wants to just get through books. So at least in my case, I couldn't get through it quick. It really forced me to pause and to read slowly. It seems a contradiction. What I'm going to say now, it seems paradoxical to my previous statement. But in addition to the attention to raw material, we also have this other element, and that is the presence of theoretical lenses, theoretical philosophical attitudes of people like Roland Barthes, Terry Eagleton, Joyce Carol Oates, literary voices like Franz Kafka. So on the one hand, you have this attention to raw material. On the other hand, you have this lenses, perspectives of cultural theory. Roland Barthes in his book titled Mythology, he talks about wrestling, boxing, and we hear a little bit of that. Joyce Carol Oates wrote about, I didn't know that, but she wrote about boxing as well. Why that is not a paradox, that theory and material both are present in this book, is because theory is also included as material. So we get these fragments from Joyce Carol Oates, fragments like lines from Terry Eagleton, an extract, a thought from Roland Barthes, a footnote from Kafka's Hunger Artist. So they are incorporated into Winkler's general approach to writing this book, which is putting together a bunch of material and constructing something out of them. The book also contains, I'll get back to the Kafka reference, the Hunger Artist. The presence of multiple perspectives in the book is really important. We have the narrator, who's presumably Michael Winkler himself, Winkler. We have the narrator's uncle, who's not his uncle, but he's referred to as his uncle, who is presented to us as someone who was in contact with the time of Joe Grimm, saw him personally in the flesh. But the narrator's uncle, who is our contact, one of our points of contact with the story, with the material, is also presented to us as an unreliable narrator because of his condition. He drinks too much. He falls asleep in the middle of a conversation. And these two characters, the narrator and these perspectives, the narrator and the narrator's uncle, they each bring in their own interest and the quality in their interest, their curiosity, their fascination. And there's also in that relationship between the two, there's noticeable intergenerational contact in their conversations. And how, what is that about? It's about access to memory. The access to memory that is enabled through our link to older people. So if you talk to your uncle, your parents, your grandparents, you notice that there are certain facts, certain memories about your family history, about the history of your city, maybe your country, that these earlier generations, they have different access to that. Lived access, maybe, but different quality of access. And now we are talking about memory here, not as something personal, but as something collective. The identity of the uncle is not clear. And that does something, that makes contact with him more about contact with the unknown. Because the person who's talking to us about Joe Grimm himself is not a transparent portal into the time that Joe Grimm lived and visited Australia. There are other perspectives in the story. Dora is an imagined character. There's a goat who speaks that adds a bit of surrealism in the story. I wonder whether goat is also a reference to the GOAT, popular expression in sports, combat sports especially. But each of these perspectives, each of these characters reveal something about Joe Grimm. They don't just bring a judgment of Grimm, they bring an understanding of him. The collaboration among perspectives makes something visible. That's my reading of the book. What we grasp through this collaboration between the perspectives is we get this sense that speaking truth, revealing the truth isn't about an individual achieving something. Truth is not an achievement of an individual. It takes help from others to speak a truth. To speak the truth of Joe Grimm. He himself was not the perfect conveyor, the perfect agent of expressing that truth, at least in language. We read that his pain was his self-expression, that he played with boxing, he introduced, in a subtle way, he introduced his own game within a game. It became a new challenge to his opponents. It became about, okay, if you can knock me out, do it, but you can't. So even though you're going to win by gaining more scores, I'm going to win in my own game. But with language, we need the narrator, we need Winkler to get the truth in language of Joe Grimm's story. It takes you can say, I wrote, my note here says, it takes a village to raise a piece of truth, to nurture it, to bring it to a point where it can be expressed. So just like how it takes a village to raise a kid, it takes a village to speak a piece of truth. Joe Grimm is described as a piece of life, as a piece of humanity, as something undeniable, despite his eccentricity, despite his oddness. He is not presented to us as exotic, as outside the realm of life, outside the realm of humanity. There are chapters about his childhood, and those chapters describe how this odd life, this eccentric life, became eccentric, how it becomes eccentric, how it gets to the edge of society, even the edge of his profession, boxing. So you can say somebody who is in combat sports, already professional combat sports, already he's eccentric, already he's at the edge of society, because doing combat sports is a bit of an extreme profession. But he manages to be extreme within that field. We get a sense of how that is his destiny, how that we get a sense of inevitability, but that doesn't interfere with his humanity. That's his destiny as a human. And in a way, so that, to me, if we are to compare this book with Kafka's Hunger Artist reads like a very painful tragedy. And the reason why the Hunger Artist is tragic is because the Kafka's artist, is not understood by the crowd. There's no perspective, with the exception of the narrator of Kafka's story. There's no point of view, there's no person who sympathizes with him, who looks at the world through his perspective, who gets his hunger, his act of fasting as his expression, the way he wants it to be understood. So Winkler here redeems that kind of loneliness, that kind of detachment from society, because we have not just one, but we have a few perspectives here who get detached from the crowd, from the unthinking, unreflective crowd, who have no memory and will not remember Joe Grimm, who do not recognize, they have no interest in understanding who Joe Grimm is, what his experience is. The crowd is not interested in that. The crowd wants to be entertained. The crowd wants a spectacle. Winkler gives us a few perspectives that are more than that. They do more than that. They are they set apart from, they stand away from the crowd and actually get involved with Joe Grimm. They have genuine curiosity with him, maybe not having direct contact or direct human relationship with him, but they have an interest in him in a way that Kafka's hunger artist never did, never enjoyed that level of understanding, that kind of recognition. That's why that's it. Kafka wrote a tragedy. Winkler's book is not really a tragedy. It's still grotesque, but it is not as unbearable as Kafka's work. Winkler also shows the temptation to dehumanize someone like Joe Grimm, the temptation to see him as exotic, as less than human, as other than human. And the questions that are raised that move people in that direction. Like, is he really experiencing pain? Maybe it's just easy for him because he doesn't experience pain the way we do. What do we know? Maybe he's, these banal questions of philosophers of mind. Really stupid questions, like maybe maybe our pain is different from his pain, and maybe he's like, that's dehumanizing. That move takes us towards dehumanizing the other person. Or maybe he has a smaller brain and a thicker skull. So those are tendencies towards dismissing, not just explaining, but dismissing the character. Winkler stands against these considerations and correctly points out that there's cruelty in them. There's violence in them, epistemic violence. Violence in knowing, in our style of knowing, we can have violence. It's important that the main perspectives don't blend into the perspective of the crowd. As I said, the crazed audience of boxing who see Joe Grimm as a spectacle, as an object within a very short-term experience. So Winkler's book is about memory as much as it is about other topics, other subjects. It is about remembering somebody from a different generation, somebody who has lived a life, who has expressed themselves, and different ways of thinking about this person, and our imperfect access to him, to this character, and the messiness of that, and engaging with the material relevant to that, including like pieces of news report by journalists from that time. So memory is a cultural process. All right, now this was a messy, I think appropriate, maybe appropriately messy review of a messy book. If you like a challenge in your reading life, like a strange book, in the words of J.M. Coetzee, this is the strangest book you are likely to read this year. If you like that challenge, read it. If you like smooth sailing of neat storylines, maybe skip this one. But I liked it. I'm going to reread it in a couple of years. And with that, thank you for listening, for watching the video, and I'll speak with you next time.